apparently he was a couple grades older than me. And I used the informal versions of speech.
Uh-oh. Hmm.
And then he like pointed out the fact that he's older than me and then wanted to like beat me up and started chasing me around the school. So that happened.
Oh. You're listening to Cultureful, where strangers become neighbors. I'm your host, Jess Lynn. Today, I'm sharing a conversation with Willie, a 28-year-old biomedical researcher from Sacramento, currently living in Atlanta. Willie is what many call a 1.5 generation immigrant, born in South Korea but raised in the US from the age of 3. Unlike many of the guests who did not grow up around many people of their cultural background, Willie grew up around many other Koreans in a tight-knit community. His childhood was defined by a constant navigation of these two cultures, from Saturday morning Korean language schools and the community life of the local Korean church, to spending his summer breaks attending public school in South Korea. This conversation is a two-part series. In part 1, we explore the historical context of South Korea that his grandparents and parents lived through, including the Japanese occupation and the Korean War. And then we get to know Willie and what growing up in the Korean community felt like to him. As always, the video version is on YouTube. Here is part 1 of my conversation with Willie. Hi, Willie. Good to see you. How's it going?
Good. Going good.
What are you up to today?
Really just cleaning. It's Sunday. And then
Uh-huh.
go for some shopping after this podcast.
Cool. Thanks for being here. I'm really glad that we're doing this. Okay, so you're Ruben's colleague. And I don't know, I think was it like Christmas or Thanksgiving dinner we had together like in 2024? And and then we're just chatting and you are so easy to talk to. And you also were like, I'm an open book. And I'm like, you really are an open book. So do you want to be on the show? And well, it's taken a little bit, but I'm glad we're doing this today. So thanks for being here to share about a little bit about your family history and like more about your growing up and kind of navigating South Korea and the US in your life. So yeah, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Let's dive in. Let's start with a little bit about family history. What do you know about each side of your family history going back, like grandparents?
I guess I know a little bit more on my mom's side than my dad's side, mainly because of what my mom has shared with me.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly just stories from them, and also I've gone back and forth to Korea to actually meet up with my family members over there and heard stories directly from them as well. So it's been a little bit of little pieces over time, and I'll be completely honest. I don't think I have the full picture, but from what I've heard overall, I think the upbringing for my parents at least was really one of struggle that I think a lot of folks from that time period can relate to, and mainly it's because it's after the Korean. My parents aren't that old, but at least their parents, they had come out from the Korean War and the occupation around that time. And
from 1910 to 1945, the Japanese occupation of Korea stripped the nation of its independence and attempted to systematically erase its culture. During these 35 years, Japan used the peninsula as a resource colony to fuel its imperial expansion. The Korean language was banned in schools, and citizens were forced to adopt Japanese surnames. Beyond cultural erasure, the human cost was staggering. Millions of Koreans were conscripted into forced labor to work in mines and factories across the Japanese Empire, and tens of thousands of Korean women were coerced into military sexual slavery, known as comfort women. This era of profound trauma forged a fierce spirit of resistance and a modern Korean identity centered on protecting its sovereignty. These unresolved historical grievances remain at the heart of high diplomatic tensions that still exist between Seoul and Tokyo today. The Korean War grew out of the vacuum left behind when Japan was defeated in 1945. The peninsula was sliced in half at the 38th parallel. The North became a communist state backed by the Soviet Union and China. while the South became a pro-Western republic supported by the United States. In June 1950, this Cold War turned into a hot war when Northern forces, armed with Soviet tanks, invaded the South to unite the country under communism. The 3-year struggle that followed became a global proxy war, killing millions and destroying nearly every major city. Because the fighting ended in 1953 with only a ceasefire and not a formal peace treaty, the two sides are technically still at war today, divided by a heavily armed border that remains a scar of a global ideological split.
And a lot of it is, my dad's side lived in Busan, and my mom's side is mostly in near Seoul. But I think the experience is quite similar for them growing up, because my dad's side is mostly like fisherman town in Busan, and then my mom's side is, I think Seoul was not as developed as it is today, but so a lot of it was farmland. And so on my mom's side, my dad was kind of like a farmer.
Your grandfather.
My grandfather, right. And so,
what kind of stuff did he farm? Do you know?
I'm not actually sure. I know it wasn't meat. It wasn't like livestock or anything, because meat was really hard to come by, I think, at the time. My mom would always share stories about how they would hang like old like pieces of fish on the ceiling, like because proteins were kind of hard to come by, right? And you would kind of just, they would hang it up in the house, kind of. I don't know what it is. It might be kind of like it was like a good luck thing, but also, I mean, meat was valuable, so.
The practice of hanging a dried pollock dates back centuries to the Joseon dynasty, long before the modern division of the peninsula. Rooted in ancient shamanism, this tradition treats the fish as a spiritual sentry for the home. Because pollock were abundant and hardy, they became symbols of wealth and survival in early Korean society. The ritual of engmagi, wrapping the fish in white thread and hanging it above a door, is an age-old belief that its unblinking eyes watch for danger while its open mouth swallows misfortune. For generations in Korea, this modest fish has become a constant symbol of resilience, shielding households through dynasties, occupations, and war.
That was just a story that I had heard from when they were growing up.
So your mom's side, near Seoul, farmers. So what year was your mom born? Because the Korean War was 1950 to 1953, right? And so was that before your parents' time?
Yeah, my dad was born in 57 and my mom was in 62, so a little after.
So your grandparents, did you hear any stories about your grandparents?
I think it was mostly just a story of struggle, because after wartime, the country was pretty much torn apart, and obviously there was a lot of help from US at the time to help rebuild Korea, and that was a huge help for the country at the time.
By the end of the fighting in 1953, South Korea was one of the poorest countries on Earth. Its infrastructure leveled and its industrial base largely trapped in the north. The United States stepped in with a massive lifeline, providing billions of dollars that, at one point, financed nearly 80% of the South's national budget. However, this was a complicated partnership. The aid was rarely purely economic. It was part of a Cold War strategy to build a military buffer against communism, often prioritizing guns over rice. This created a deep dependency that allowed Washington to exert heavy influence over South Korean domestic politics. While the assistance prevented total collapse, it also led to years of friction as Korean leaders pushed for more independence, eventually transforming the lopsided patron-client relationship into the modern economic partnership we see today.
I've also heard stories about, like, during my grandparents' generation, and how really a lot of folks were taken to Japan during the Japanese occupation during that time too. I don't remember the exact years, but my grandfather's father was basically shipped to Japan, and then he spent some time there in Japan working during the Korean occupation, or the Japanese occupation of Korea. So those are like the two main stories that I've mainly heard, because I don't think they really talk about them much. And a lot of times,
hard to talk about.
They really bring this stuff more for historical context, because my parents didn't live through it. but it's mostly the stories they've heard.
Have they shared some of the stories that they've heard?
During the occupation, there were essentially Koreans were stripped of their entire, national identity at the time. It was a pretty dark period. You couldn't really use Korean like as a language. Having Korean names was banned at the time. I mean, there's some really dark stories. There's this whole, there was this like maybe a protest, but like an awareness campaign to really bring awareness to some of the atrocities that the Japanese had committed during the time, which the government has denied. And I don't even know if denial is the right word. It's mostly just kind of wanting to push aside the fact that it happened, trying to ignore it. I mean, one of those examples was like the comfort women. The Japanese had basically taken Korean women against their will, either during the occupation in Korea during the occupation or taking them back to Japan, right?
During the Japanese occupation, tens of thousands of Korean women were coerced into a state-sponsored system of sexual slavery for the Japanese military. These survivors, euphemistically called comfort women, were often trapped in comfort stations across the empire. After the war ended in 1945, survivors returned to a country that was not yet ready to hear their stories. Many lived in silence for decades, carrying the physical and psychological scars of their ordeal. It wasn't until the 1990s that survivors began to speak out, sparking a movement that remains active to this day. Every single Wednesday, rain or shine, activists and supporters gather at the site of the Japanese embassy in Seoul, facing the bronze Statue of Peace for the Wednesday demonstration, the longest-running protest in history. Their goal is to prevent the history from being washed over or ignored. A major point of friction involves the Japanese government's response, particularly in education. Recent efforts to remove or downplay mentions of these crimes in Japanese public school textbooks have fueled accusations for historical revisionism. For the survivors and their families, the fight isn't just about the past. It's about ensuring the next generation in Japan learns the truth about what happened, rather than a sanitized version of history.
And so these are real stories that happened, less than 100 years ago that people are still trying to bring to light. But, it's obviously the pain is the traumas are more in the minds of those in the older generations than I think the younger generations. So when you talk to folks kind of in my age, these things, yes, we're like, oh, this is bad. This shouldn't have happened. The older generation is definitely more not, ready to move on because it's definitely a pain point.
For like your parents' generation and their parents' generation? Okay, so I see what you're saying. So it was more, they were letting you know things that happened in the context, but it wasn't necessarily like told as part of family history or their own experiences or something like that. Is that what you...
Yeah, it's more historical context, right? Just trying to keep me informed.
Let's shift to your parents. Like, what do you know of the families they grew up in? Like, how many siblings?
Yeah, big families. I don't think it's that glamorous, really. Both my mom and dad, they both grew up in pretty big families. My mom's side, my mom is the second to youngest. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 6 kids on my mom's side. My dad's side is, oh my gosh, I'm going to forget someone, but I'm going to say 6 as well.
So your parents kind of both had challenging childhoods because it was just, the aftermath of the Korean War and challenging conditions to grow up in, both big families. And so from there, they grew up, and then how did they meet?
Yeah, I wish I can give a lot of details on this, but it's really a kind of a boring story. It's that it was arranged. So parents came, together and was like, hey, there's this person you should consider. And here we are. They had me.
So fast forward. So Willie's born, and I think you're born in Korea, right? South Korea?
Yes.
And I think you were there between 0 and 3, right? And so like in that time, what do you know of like the context you were born into in terms of like what town were you born into? Like who in the family was around? What was community like?
So I was born Korean in Korea and then came to the US when I was 3. I think my parents definitely left everything behind. There was still family in the US. So I think the transition to moving here was a little easier. Just having my aunt and my uncle on the East Coast, and then also my other aunt and uncle on the West Coast, both on my mom's side. So initially moved to Maryland actually when I was like 2.5, 3. And then shortly after moved to Sacramento next to my aunt and uncle there. My grandmother also as well. And so moving to the US, we weren't completely alone. And so we had a pretty good social structure and family around. And after moving, because I can't say too much about what happened in Korea because I was so young, but really after moving, it was just finding a place where we can find community. And Sacramento is kind of an interesting place because it's not a big city like San Francisco and LA, but there is still a Korean population there. It's not huge, but there was like a whole area right in Sacramento, like in the South Sacramento area and Elk Grove area. It's a little north of Elk Grove. There's a lot of Korean communities there and Korean stores. And I think it was very easy for my parents to find a community there. And part of it was my grandmother, she would also go to Korean church. And so I would just follow her every Sunday. And then they had this, Saturday, like Korean language school. And so that was another thing that like every Saturdays, I'd go, and everyone else is Korean there, right? Like kids my age. I think this was a really great place, like to kind of figure out my Korean identity while living in America, right? And so a lot of my lifelong friends were made through these communities, and I'm not there in Sac anymore, but I think part of it is wherever you go in the US, I think there's pockets of communities. And I think for my parents, it was really helpful because I think part of it is also the language barriers, right? Just living in the US, there's like having people from your own community knowing, like having gone through this similar challenges navigating the US system, whether it be like insurance or healthcare or whatnot, it was just really helpful having that community.
And okay, so we're going to come to some of like the navigating stuff in a little bit. I want to come back to, okay, so I'm glad you mentioned church and Korean school. Let's start with Korean school. Like describe to me what was like a typical Saturday at Korean school.
I just remember it was early in the morning, which I didn't like. I don't remember exactly how long, but maybe like 3 to 4 hours on a Saturday. You'd have like a morning class. You'd probably have a break, probably have class again, and then lunch. And lunches were always great. I think the best parts were definitely, like thinking back, the lunches they served were so good. It's just like you get like this long row of tables with just like trays and trays of food. You just pick what you want. And
it was like a buffet, like a trays and trays of buffet food? Essentially.
All Korean food though. All Korean food, yeah. So you have all your side dishes, your main dishes, you have your meats, you basically get everything. I think that's the part I miss the most.
Was the food at Korean school? How long did you go till?
I want to say I started really young. I was like 6 years old, and then like probably till middle school.
Was Korean school something that you like enjoyed going to? Did you have friends there? Like, was it fun?
As a kid going to school, I think is inherently not fun. I will still stand by that because I think at the time I was like, oh, I have to go to school on a weekend. And so I think the child in me was probably not happy about that. But looking back, right, just the fact that I have the ability to speak Korean more so than I think someone who just strictly raised here and speaking Korean primarily in the home, I definitely have to be grateful for going to these classes and learning Korean and having that community. But as a child, no one wants to go to school.
No one wants to go to school?
On a weekend.
Well, okay, I could kind of relate. So I went to Chinese school but then like my parents didn't enroll me until I was like in 8th grade. And so I was like way bigger than all the other kids at like the lower level because my language was very beginner for reading and writing. I think I was in this class with like 2nd graders or 3rd graders. And so that I was like mortified. So on top of like hating going to school after, like on the weekend, I was like mortified and so bored because things were being taught to like a very much younger brain. And I couldn't handle it. So I only lasted, I think, for like a semester and I was like, I can't do this. But I mean, and so because of that, my like Chinese is not as literate as I would like it to be.
Okay. It's never late, never too late.
Yeah. Do you have a Korean name that you like went by in Korean school and like Korean church?
Yeah. The adults will call you by your Korean name, I think most of the time.
What's a Korean name?
It's spelled U or Wooil. So, but in Korean it's Uil.
Uh-huh.
And you can see how that maybe translates to Willie. It's a little easier to say.
Oh, so the Willie was chosen off of your Korean name.
So it probably had some influence. The other story that I heard, I might need to verify this, but I think my uncle Steve, who's my mom's brother-in-law, I think his dad is William, and I think that might have inspired my name.
Oh. And you had your Korean name first before you had your English name, right?
Right, because my legal name actually in America is Uil. First name Woo, middle name Il. So that's another like weird administrative thing, because I think my first name should have really just been Uil, one word. But I think that's just another thing that some immigrants may face. It's just the naming things don't always line up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the categories when they're like bringing you and filling out the forms.
Yeah, I think the forms were just filled out wrong.
So what does your name mean in Korean?
So the only thing I know is that the il part of Uil means one.
Okay.
The other ones, I'm not too sure.
I think we should look it up right now.
The thing is, I think there's a lot of different, like even with the same word or the same pronunciation, there's multiple meanings. So that's the issue. It's like the same word, like that you phonetically sound out, can have multiple meanings.
Right.
And I'm not sure which ones of those are. But these are good questions.
Okay, so then the adults use this and the kids use this in Korean school?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, most of the kids just call me Willie. Like all the kids are like mostly primarily English speaking. And so, yeah, I think mostly it's the adults calling me by my Korean name.
So the Korean didn't like carry over into like recess or lunch.
Not really. And I think that's the thing, if you're not using it at like in the country, right, regularly, I think it's really hard to become like really fluent, right? Because it's like you use it or lose it. It's very much true. Just using it regularly, right? And I think just Saturday school is usually not enough, to be completely honest. It helps with maybe vocab, but
it wasn't like super helpful.
I don't know if this was your experience in Chinese school too, but like the kids are really not engaged most of the time.
Yeah.
They're there because their parents are telling them to be, right?
Okay, but then at home, did you speak Korean with your parents?
Pretty much. I mean, I pretty much had to, because, yeah, it was pretty much one of those things where English was not, their first language for my parents. And so I had to learn Korean to communicate with them. And they love to remind me that they taught me Korean and I should be thankful, because now it's a useful skill and I can actually communicate with them, right? One of the stories that's actually common, I think, with kids who have immigrant parents is like communication, right? Like, especially if their parents don't speak English well, right? There can be a communication gap.
In immigrant households, the communication gap is a nearly universal experience, representing a structural breakdown known as heritage language loss. This process exists on a broad spectrum. It ranges from a minor nuance gap, where children can understand their parents but struggle to express complex feelings, to a total language schism, where shared comprehension vanishes entirely. As children immerse themselves in a new culture, they often experience subtractive bilingualism, where the dominant language actively replaces their mother tongue. This erosion typically leaves children with only a receptive or rudimentary level of their parents' language, enough to follow functional instructions about chores or food, but insufficient for discussing mental health, abstract dreams, or shared history. What did your parents end up doing for work as they settled into Sacramento?
So my dad picked up it's a niche skill, but at the same time, a lot of people in the Korean community, like you can actually find a lot of folks in this industry, like dental technician work. So that's what my dad did, is he learned a very specialized skill in creating like the teeth, like stuff that you put into your teeth after you get them pulled out. So like the molds for the teeth and like the crown for root canals and things like that. So it was a very specialized, like hands-on skill that he learned through a Korean community. The main thing was he was able to learn these skills because his boss was also Korean. A lot of it was like, having that community and just having, I think language was a big barrier for my dad at the time. And so that really helped him, I think, get his foot in the door to learning a new skill. And that was pretty much what he did to support my family for 20 years. And my mom stayed home and she took care of me. Now she's working though. Yeah, it's kind of an interesting story too. Yeah, after not working for so long, yeah, my
Uh-huh.
mom is now working and she's thriving. She loves it. So
Okay. What is she working in?
she works at the post office, moving mail.
Mm-hmm. Does it just like feel good to be working and having a job, having colleagues, and like what do you know that she likes about it?
I think what you just mentioned, right? I think it's just
Mm-hmm.
when you don't work for a long period of time, right? There is something I think you feel like you're missing out on, or I think there's a lot to it without getting too deep. Making money obviously feels good. I mean, I think it's just the fact that she brings in money, and I think
Mm-hmm.
she takes pride in that. After my dad just bringing in the money for the last 20 years, it definitely just has changed the dynamic of the household as well. It's just been an interesting sight to see. And my mom is
Okay.
obviously happy because she feels like she has more independence, and it's definitely a different vibe.
We're going to take a quick break from my conversation with Willie. If you've enjoyed learning about history as it's been coming up in the interviews and context notes lately, there's a new show I think you should check out called History for the Reckoning. It's a show that dives deep into uncomfortable history, the kinds of stories we need to learn so they're never repeated. Just like the history of the Japanese occupation of Korea that we're talking about in this episode today. Their first season is focused on the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II. It centers on February 19, 1942, the date Executive Order 9066 was signed by President Franklin Roosevelt. That order authorized the forced removal of all persons deemed a threat to national security from the West Coast to relocation centers further inland, resulting in the incarceration of Japanese Americans. The host, Spencer Ford, shares first-hand accounts from survivors, important cultural context from historians, and analysis from experts. The first episode explores a conversation with George Takei of Star Wars fame, who was imprisoned along with his family during this time. The series also highlights the decades-long fight for redress and healing led by the Japanese American community. Find History for the Reckoning wherever you listen to podcasts. Any podcast app will have it. Now, let's get back to my conversation with Willie. So, Sundays you would go with your grandma to Korean church?
Pretty much.
Take me through like what a typical Sunday would be like in detail.
Here's the other thing. I think Catholic Church sometimes also does Saturdays. So sometimes I've
Uh-huh.
gone. So they would do this thing where.
It was a Catholic church?
So it's a Korean Catholic. It's the only Korean Catholic church in Sacramento. Yeah, I think Saturday they would actually have mostly the stuff for the youth. Like they would have a separate mass just for youth on Saturday afternoons, and then they would do the like main mass for the general like on Sundays. And so I guess in my youth I was definitely going more on Saturdays. And then as I got older, I would go on Sundays too with my grandmother. But like I think it was mostly Saturdays where I think they had like Bible, study. They also had a Korean language class as part of the church as well. So I had like double Korean school.
Whoa. Uh-huh. So did you crush at Korean?
I wasn't bad.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was definitely more proficient than my peers. And part of it was I actually don't think it was the Korean school that
Just like home, right? Because you like spoke it more at home.
it's more, yeah, it was really the stuff at home. And also, I don't know if I mentioned, but I did some trips to Korea for summer school.
Mm-hmm.
So I spent 3 summers in Korea going to public school there.
Oh, right. Okay, yeah, that was like one of the next chapters we're gonna get to. Uh-huh.
And I think that was a huge way to learn Korean because if you're in Korea, you have no choice but to only speak Korean, right?
Right.
For 2.5 months. And so I think that's actually where the proficiency from Korean comes from.
Mm-hmm. So back to what was it like to go to the Saturday afternoon mass? And then what was it like to go to Sunday mass?
Saturday is definitely more youth focused. And so a lot of, even the priest who's doing mass, usually it's in English. And then on Sundays, it would be in all Korean. And also, different music choices, right? Like you have more like band style music. You have a guitarist, you have the singer, the drummist for the youth groups. But then you go over to, Sunday mass and it's just like people, doing the hymns, so
The organ?
with the organ playing. It's a different vibe. Totally. I think all the kids definitely prefer the Saturday masses.
Because it was geared towards your age group.
Right, right. And the songs are more fun to sing along to. And
Are there any memories from Saturday afternoon church that stick out?
man, so many memories from that church.
Tell me some.
Well, I'll say the food was also great every time. The dinners, they have.
Wait, so who provided the food?
So it's all the ajumas, right? The
aunties?
Yeah, a lot of them are parents, right? Like parents of the kids who are going to the schools.
Okay.
Like most of them are volunteers. So shout out to them. Almost everyone's a volunteer there. There's only a couple people who, help maintain the church and things like that. But a lot of it's volunteer oriented. And I think another there's a lot of core memories, I guess. But I always remember break times. We would always play basketball. There's a basketball court there and there was always so many flat balls. But we played with them anyways because that's all we had. So it's a core memory. Just doing kids shenanigan stuff, like playing with like large piles of sand, right, and like creating like random forts in the large piles of sand.
So you were mostly looking forward to the break times, once again.
Hey, weren't we all? So I think definitely, I mean, the school stuff is just you're there because your parents make you. That's like 90% of the kids, right? If not all.
Going to Saturday afternoon church, that was like a mandatory thing in your household for you?
So here's another thing. My parents are not Catholic. So
what? But then they wanted you to go.
So yeah, I think it was one of those things that like my parents just wanted to keep me busy.
Healthy influence.
Yeah, because I mean, I'm also an only child, so like I think part of it was for me to socialize, right, and go to these things and be part of these communities. And I think they were trying to supplement that fact. And so I wasn't forced to go, but I think part of it is like I also had friends who went every Saturday and Sunday. And so like, yes, I didn't want to go to the classes, but there were still things that I look forward to, I guess.
Like basketball.
Like basketball and the break times and the food.
And the food, the dinner.
Right. And so I think the Bible study and Korean classes may not have been like, super informative, but it's really for the community.
Okay, what were some of your favorite dishes at church?
Any of the marinated meats and rice. Yeah. Some of the soups are really good. I don't know if I can pick like one thing, but any of the stews they made were really good.
And they would just like bring it and everything would be cold, or how do you keep things hot?
Yeah, they have a whole kitchen. So they have this like whole kitchen and I think big pots. Everything they make is in big batches. And so I just assume like if they make a big pot of a stew, then they'll maybe keep it on the flame for a little bit.
So they would cook it there, or they cook it at home and bring it and reheat it?
No, they cook everything in the kitchen. So it's a full like kitchen with like, those big like fridges. And
so that's kind of like a community time for the aunties.
Yeah, no, they put in a lot of work.
So that sounds so delicious. I mean, I love Korean food, so that just makes me hungry. So then you would go and then you would like have your entire dinner there. So like your parents wouldn't have to worry about your like Saturday night dinner every Saturday. That's kind of beautiful and brilliant as parents.
Yes, that may have been their other plan. Yeah.
Any core memories from Sunday church?
Yeah, Sundays are always just the big days, usually. Now that I think about it, like Sundays are like, it's Christmas Mass, right? Or Easter Mass or New Year's Mass. So it's like, I would only go for the big days because that's when like, it was just the main Mass and Sundays are big and everyone gathers. So they're like, oh, you got to go because everyone's going. I'll be honest, not my favorite days because it's a lot of, I think it's overwhelming just how many people are there. And Mass is not fun as a kid. You're just sitting there listening. You got to sit there for an hour straight.
Not as much to look forward to.
No. There's still food at the end, but that's pretty much what I remember being the only thing I looked forward to.
So I'm very curious about this, right? Did you go to public school? So you went to public school during the weekdays, and then you have kind of like Korean community stuff on the weekends. I'm curious, like, did you feel like there was any like cultural code switching between public school and when you hung out with the Korean community?
Yeah, I think definitely before high school, it felt like there was this dual, like I would have my days at regular grade school, right? Which is just all English speaking folks. And then I would have the weekends where I'm like kind of just surrounded by Koreans. So I think during that time, I definitely did feel like there was this, I think you described it as code switching,
Mm-hmm.
maybe like hat wearing, similar thing. I don't think I really thought about that too much growing up, but I think it just having this two, like it was very separate, right? It was weekdays and weekends. So I think it was easy to kind of keep the two separate. As high school rolled around, it kind of was like all the same. There was no like dual identity. It was just, I am a Korean American. Like I had met a lot of peers who were kind of similar, situation. And I think I definitely, like I had a lot of people in my similar situation. Maybe not so like so much born in Korea, but maybe like live their whole life here, right? But also have Korean parents who are also, immigrants. And so I don't feel like I had an identity crisis really. And also my high school was quite diverse in that like I think everyone came from different backgrounds. And so you could really just maybe be proud of your culture, right? And just like not have to hide bringing your lunch, for example, right? Maybe in elementary school, like you would bring like kimbap or something smelly, smelly, right? And then kids are like,
You did air quotes for the listener. You did air quotes, for smelly.
So and I think that perspective, right, just changed in high school. It's like, I don't care. Like no one else seems to care. And I'd have to give a lot of credit to my high school and my community there, because I think it's also like having a diverse high school like that is also not something you come across every day.
Mm-hmm. But your elementary and middle school weren't diverse.
I'd say definitely less diverse than the high school that I went to. Like in my class, it was rare to find another Korean. I think that's the other thing. There may have been other Asians, but maybe one other Korean type vibe in elementary and middle school.
Okay, so before high school, when you were in public school on the weekdays, like how did weekdays Willie behave differently from like weekend Willie?
As a kid, I think overall, I don't know if I changed any behaviors because I was kind of a troublemaker all around when I was a kid.
You were? Okay. What were you like as a kid?
I was definitely a lot for my parents. I think I was definitely very hyperactive. If you actually talk to some of my upperclassmen at my church, a lot of them will tell you that I was a very annoying kid, and they can't believe that I'm not as annoying now. So I think I just find that funny because back then I think I was the troublemaker.
Like, what's an example of something you would do?
Being disruptive in class, not paying attention when the teacher's talking. This is Korean school, right? No one else is. It's not just me, right? So I'd like to say that I was definitely singled out potentially. But
got labeled as a troublemaker?
Something like that.
You're like over it, like over sitting in school.
I was just very hyperactive. I think that was the other thing. And I guess the older kids didn't like that. I don't think that really changed depending on where I was. I think as I got older, I guess I matured and grew up and wasn't as disruptive.
Were there different social expectations? Like, okay, so I'm asking this partially because one of my close friends when I was in middle school, she's Korean. And when we were in 8th grade, we were like prepping to go to high school, right? And she was really nervous because I think she grew up around some Koreans because like in the neighborhood, there was a lot of like Chinese, Taiwanese, and Koreans around. She was really nervous thinking about going to high school because she was telling me that there were like these expectations of how you need to properly greet your elders, like older kids in high school. And she was like worried that she would come across other Korean kids at high school and like maybe like not do the right thing to be respectful. And then she would get in trouble with them and they would be pissed. But you kind of grew up before high school and like going to Korean school, going to Korean church. So did you experience any of that? But it probably was stuff that came second nature to you, like growing up around them.
Yeah, that story you just told about like the whole etiquette thing because there are a lot of etiquettes in like Asian culture, right? In general, I think in Korean culture, especially there is that idea of like respecting your elders, right? That's very much ingrained into even the language of Korean. The ways in which you phrase your sentences, right? Like if someone's older than you, you have to put the more formal version of it, like 안녕. Even just a simple hello, right? Simple hello becomes from 안녕 to 안녕하세요, right? Just based on who you're talking to, right? And so
that whole haseyo is the polite part?
Pretty much. Or the or like something you'll And there's different variations of this for all kinds of different phrases. I think that is one of those things. I think when you're first learning, even like trying to learn Korean or traveling to Korea, those are some of those things that like I think if you say incorrectly, you may come off as like either rude or impolite.
Korean is often cited by linguists for having one of the most systematically honorific systems in the world. While languages like Vietnamese or Thai rely heavily on a complex web of pronouns, Korean, much like Japanese, is agglutinative, meaning it glues mandatory politeness suffixes directly onto verbs. This structure is a historical legacy of the Joseon dynasty, which ran from 1392 to 1910, during which Neo-Confucianism codified social order into the very rules of speech. While other languages have polite modes, the sheer number of mandatory verb endings and honorific noun swaps makes the Korean system one of the most grammatically pervasive methods of social coding in existence.
And I have a story to share actually about this, similar to what you shared. Is when I went to Korea to do the summer schools there, I think this was after third grade summer. So I was still a little kid, and my peers are probably, also little kids. And I think I was just talking. I don't remember how this interaction came up, but I talked to this guy. He's with this group of his friends. Apparently he was a couple grades older than me. And I was like, I used the informal versions of speech. And then he like pointed out the fact that he's older than me and then wanted to like beat me up and started chasing me around the school. So that happened.
Oh, and he did like chase you around the school?
Yeah. And I don't know what happened. I was pretty fast. So I think I probably outran him, but I just remember that happening. And I was pretty scared because I was like, what the frick?
It's like, oh no. Like, cause it wasn't intentional, right?
It wasn't intentional, obviously. Like,
you just didn't know.
Yeah. But they take this I think as kids, even like they took that very seriously. And obviously as adults, people aren't going to be very like chasing you down, trying to beat you up. But like there is like this hidden system of like respect.
And it's just like anyone older than you versus anyone younger than you.
And I think it also changes based on context, because even if someone is older than someone, if they have more experience than them in like a profession or something, they'll still call them by the more formal, respectful ways. So I think it's very context specific, but age does tend to dominate that hierarchy.
This is fascinating. Okay. And after we're going to get into like the back and forth to school in Korea, but yeah, I just wanted to say like, this is fascinating because I really like watching Korean reality dating shows. I'm not really into Korean dramas, but I'm really into Korean dating shows and like Physical 100, like the physical reality competitions and cooking competition. I guess I just like Korean reality TV. And it's always fascinating to me when it appears to me, it's like a whole bunch of people that look like they're peer age groups, like in a peer age group. But then, in the beginning, people are always like speaking very politely, especially if they don't know each other's age. And then later on, they'll be like, okay, but can we just speak informally? Can we drop this? And then people kind of agree. And then later, like if it's a dating thing, they don't know each other's like age. Then later they'll be like, oh my gosh, you're 89. Oh my gosh, you're 90, and then they'll like have to kind of maybe like, oh, I was talking to like the opposite way. And then it's some kind of like mind blowing for people. But it's like mind blowing to me because the Taiwanese, from what I gather in my experiences, and you're talking about how like you think that in Asian cultures, this is really prominent. I think this degree of awareness of people's age. So I have like cousins that are like 10 years older than me. And like, yes, I call them like big sister. But like, besides that, like, I don't change my grammar. What I'm talking about? I don't change the word usage. Like the polite register is like, I don't know. Like, I think maybe it's for like maybe the next generation up or something. It's not so granular. Right.
The 1 to 2 years really doesn't matter a whole lot. Yeah. But in Korean culture, it does matter. Right.
It appears so. Yes. quite matter a bunch if you got someone so pissed about it in elementary school. Yeah. Fascinating. Thank you for sharing. Let's take a break.
Sounds good.
That was part 1 of my conversation with Willie. His is a story that really highlights what it's like to navigate two cultural identities when you have the deep connections and resources of a community behind you. For many of my previous guests, the immigrant or minority experience was often a story of isolation, of being one of the few families of their background in a specific town. For Willie, growing up in a tight-knit Korean community meant having access to a network of shared language and identity. In part 2, we'll explore the summers he spent in South Korea attending public school, the experience of helping his parents navigate the U.S. as a child, something so many children of immigrants can relate to, and his later reflections on identity and belonging. Remember to subscribe or follow so you don't miss it. If you're enjoying Season 3, please consider becoming a Season 3 supporter. Your contribution helps us bring these nuanced, everyday narratives to the forefront. This week, I want to give a shout out to founding supporters Martina and Hope, Maggie, and Han. Thank you for your early contributions and your belief in the power and importance of this kind of storytelling. You can find the link to donate, the video version of this episode, and ways to connect with Willie in the show notes. This episode was produced and edited by me, with advising and executive production support from Ruben Nyana Ruben. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Jess Lynn. Take care of yourself and your neighbors, and I'll see you soon.